Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. After almost 20 years of marriage, it struck me how little I truly understood my wife. Perhaps the blame lay with me for not delving deeper into our connection. We functioned well enough as partners, but an undeniable emotional chasm separated us. She wasn't my soulmate, and I suspected she felt the same way. Still, we were solid enough to raise 3 teenagers under one roof. I worked in the claims department at a sizable auto insurance firm. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, offering excellent benefits, including a pension plan I'd qualify for in 3 more years. Our house was our own, though its market value had sunk below the balance of the mortgage. Noreen, my wife, was the model of reliability in her role. As a homemaker, she took pride in maintaining an immaculate household, ensuring the laundry was flawless, and preparing meals with precision. The demands of managing a home seemed to keep her in shape. Her figure had hardly changed since high school. Neither of us pursued higher education, and we married shortly after I started working. We each believed we were chasing what we wanted out of life. Noreen sought freedom from her overbearing parents, while I yearned for the security of a committed partner. We were comfortable with each other, and it felt like a solid beginning. However, our relationship lacked the fiery romance and intense passion often seen in movies. Nevertheless, our physical connection was satisfying and never a source of conflict, until I discovered otherwise. It all began at one of those dreaded office parties. I wasn't a fan of dancing, but Noreen loved it, so I let her enjoy herself. I spent the evening with the other non-dancing spouses, while the singles and a few married men entertained the women on the dance floor. The only thing that caught my attention was how often she partnered with Dirk Franklin. Dirk was a smooth talker and a skilled dancer, but also had a notorious reputation as a womanizer. There were moments when I lost sight of Noreen, though she always returned shortly after. The party wasn't enjoyable for me, but I endured it for her sake. Usually the trade-off was a more passionate night together afterward. Alcohol had a way of emboldening her. That night, the intimacy exceeded expectations, making the otherwise dreary evening seem worthwhile. Monday morning at work started uneventfully, but the day soon took an unsettling turn. I noticed colleagues casting peculiar glances in my direction, often stifling laughter. It didn't take long to figure out the cause. Dirk. He was surrounded by a group of co-workers, animatedly recounting some story, occasionally glancing my way with a smug grin. Dirk and I had never been friends, and his behavior grated on my nerves. By mid-morning, I cornered Barry, a colleague I trusted, in the copy room to demand answers. "Barry, what's going on with Dirk? If he keeps smirking at me, I might lose it." Barry hesitated, but eventually spoke. "Look, John, I don't know if it's true, but Dirk's been bragging that he slept with Noreen on Saturday night." "That's ridiculous," I snapped. "Noreen wouldn't even entertain the idea." "I thought the same," Barry admitted, "but he's got proof. He's showing off a pair of women's panties, claiming they're hers. He's even letting guys sniff them." "What?" My thoughts reeled. "How would he even get her underwear?" Barry sighed. "He says she gave them to him after they hooked up in one of the hotel's conference rooms." I shook my head in disbelief. "Did you actually see them?" Barry nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, they're silk, kind of gray or silver." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I vividly remembered Noreen getting ready for the party, slipping into her favorite silver silk lingerie set, the one I'd gifted her for Valentine's Day. If Dirk had described any other color, I could have dismissed it as a cruel joke, but his account matched reality too well. As fury boiled inside me, I noticed Dirk heading toward the men's restroom. He'd been downing coffee all morning, and I realized this might be my chance. I trailed closely behind him, keeping my distance. Confrontations in public places like this weren't my style, and demanding Dirk stop spreading rumors about my wife was out of the question. For all I knew, it might not even be a rumor anymore. A direct encounter would only alert him to my suspicions, and I couldn't risk that. I needed another strategy. The easy option, slamming his head against the restroom wall, crossed my mind, but that wasn't who I was. At least, That's what I told myself. Instead, I waited for him to finish his business, then hit him square in the nose as he turned around. The sharp sound of impact echoed in the tiled room, and blood spattered across my shirt. My anger flared hotter. As he doubled over, clutching his face, I struck him again. Dirk was a large man, but to my astonishment, he didn't fight back. As I rifled through his pockets, my fingers closed around a pair of silk panties. My fury burned even brighter. I delivered 2 swift kicks to his groin, leaving him crumpled on the restroom floor. On my way out, I saw him retching, but I didn't stop. I left the office early, skipping lunch entirely. By the time I returned, the consequences had already caught up with me. My job was gone, and Dirk had been admitted to the hospital. The HR process was brief, just 20 minutes, and my termination was finalized. With a single decision, I was jobless. Life, however, continued as usual. It was grocery day. I sat in silence at the kitchen table, brooding, as Noreen's car pulled into the garage. When she came inside carrying grocery bags, she greeted me cheerfully. "Hi, honey. What are you doing home so early? Are you feeling okay?" I didn't answer as she placed the bags on the counter. "Could you help me with the rest of the groceries?" she asked, her tone still light. My silence lingered, and she shrugged before heading back to the garage. When she returned with the next load, her expression shifted. She noticed something was wrong. Setting the bags on the table, she turned to me with concern. "What's going on, John? Why are you home?" she asked, unpacking a carton of eggs. "They fired me," I replied flatly. Her hands froze mid-motion. "What? Fired? That doesn't make sense. Why?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain. Finally, I decided there was no point in holding back. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out the silk panties and tossed them onto the table. Her face turned pale as she stared at them. "Oh no," she murmured, her voice trembling. She gripped her head with both hands. "No, no, no, this can't be happening." Her cries started as a low whimper but quickly grew into anguished sobs. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I sat across from her, my voice calm but firm. "Care to explain?" I asked. Her sobbing intensified. I waited in silence, letting her gather herself. After a moment, she wiped her tear-streaked face, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm so sorry, John," she stammered. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I drank too much and I did something I regret." "Don't give me that," I snapped. "You weren't drunk enough to forget what you were doing." "No, John, please listen. It wasn't like that. It meant nothing. There's nothing between Dirk and me, I swear. I'm so sorry," she pleaded. "If it was such a mistake, why didn't you tell me?" My voice was cold and measured. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her tone desperate. "I didn't want you to find out." I shook my head, my disbelief mounting. "If you didn't want me to find out, why do it with someone like Dirk, the office loudmouth?" "He promised me he wouldn't tell anyone," she cried, her voice breaking. "Promised?" I scoffed. "How could you be so unbelievably stupid?" "This morning, every man in the building caught a hint of the aftermath. Why did you let him take them? How could you have been so reckless?" "I didn't let him take them. I gave them to him to throw away. They were used. I couldn't wear them again." "Why on earth would you use a pair of underwear for that?" "John, I'm sorry. This wasn't how things were supposed to unfold." "So, are you apologizing for doing it, or because I found out?" "Both." "Unbelievable, Noreen. I wrecked my entire life because of you. What do you expect me to do? Just smile and say, 'I forgive you'? That's not going to happen." "Can I explain? A real explanation? Not some excuse about being drunk. I'm not falling for that." "No, I wasn't that drunk." "Then what? Did you and Dirk just happen to have some wild fling in an empty conference room?" "John, no. That's not how it happened." "Then tell me. How did it happen? Don't make me spell it out. Please don't make me relive it. It must have been quite a cleanup afterward." "Stop. That's not fair." "Fair? Don't act like you don't understand. What's the first thing you told me to do when we got home? Tell me, Noreen. In the bedroom, what was the first thing?" "No, John. This isn't about that. What happened with Dirk has nothing to do with that." "I'm not buying it. You're acting like this is trivial. You're exaggerating. It wasn't anything meaningful." Wasn't meaningful? Noreen, I've sacrificed everything for you. Do you think it didn't matter to me? You might think it was meaningless, but I lost my job, my pension, my family. This wasn't nothing. It was my whole life. She stayed silent, watching me as I got to my feet. I have to leave now. The cops will probably be here soon, and I don't plan to stick around. Why would the police be coming? What's happening, John? I might have had a little confrontation with your new boyfriend when I returned your underwear. That's why I got fired. Dirk's probably already told the police his side of the story. Who knows? Maybe I'll end up in jail just so you could have a bit of fun. Where am I supposed to go, John? I don't know, and frankly, I don't care. I packed up my things while you were out shopping. Her eyes began to well with tears, but I turned away before she could break down. At the door, I paused and glanced back. You'll need to explain this to the kids. Be honest. Don't spin it to make yourself look better, because if you do, you'll regret it. With what little money I had left in my account, I figured I could get by for 6 months. Before leaving town, I paid off and canceled every credit card. Whatever remained, she could use to keep things going for the kids. School would be out in a few weeks. They needed her stability, not mine. As for me, I had no destination in mind. All I knew was I couldn't stay. I couldn't say whether leaving would ease or complicate Noreen's life, and I was just as unsure about my own future. What would I do when my money ran out? There was even a slim chance I might not qualify for unemployment since my layoff had been legitimate. On my first night away, I crashed at my brother's small apartment in Schuylkill Haven. With limited space, I ended up sleeping under his desk, making do until I could figure out something more stable. By the next day, I had moved into a modest, fully furnished one-bedroom apartment that included utilities and even came with internet-connected cable. I had cut ties with my previous life, turning off my phone to avoid calls altogether. Still, I knew I couldn't avoid my kids forever. To keep my mind occupied, I threw myself into my new job working with Robbie's crew, though the work itself was far from pleasant. The crew consisted of 3 experienced guys adept at tree climbing, cherry picking, and stump removal. My role was strictly to assist, and I approached it with determination. They appreciated my effort, teaching me tricks of the trade as we worked. Keeping busy was a relief, helping me push the situation with Noreen out of my mind. However, one thing was clear. Filing for divorce was now a top priority. My oldest daughter, Terry, was an intelligent and kind-hearted girl. She had 2 months left until high school graduation and planned to study dental technology at a local college. Brian, my middle child, aimed to enlist in the Marines as soon as he graduated the following year. Sal, the youngest, still had 2 years of high school to go. Her current aspiration was to get married and have kids, a stark change from her earlier dream of becoming a teacher. They were all good kids. Brian spent his days running around the neighborhood, convinced it was preparation for the Marines. Terry worked at the hospital gift shop selling candy, while Sal was glued to social media, practically living on Twitter. Most of my communication with them was through Terry. Conversations with Sal seemed inappropriate given her age, and Brian flat out refused to discuss the family situation. After I left, Noreen sat the kids down and laid everything out for them. She was blunt. Brian immediately stormed out and refused to speak to her again. Sal cried silently, and Terry was the only one who tried to engage in an actual conversation about the separation. When Terry pressed Noreen for details, she got evasive, leaving Terry feeling both angry and confused. Once I filed for divorce, things escalated. Terry called to inform me that Noreen had started going out frequently, often returning home drunk. This behavior began almost immediately after the divorce papers were served. The kids did their best to steer clear of her, but the weight of her actions clearly affected them. Terry didn't believe another man was in the picture, but Brian remained tight-lipped, and Sal's complaints became increasingly frequent. Terry continued to maintain limited contact with Noreen, but even that was strained. While I disliked the situation, as long as Noreen wasn't bringing men into the house, I felt there wasn't much I could do. Then, a week later, the situation turned dangerous. I was on the job with Josh and Jimmy, 2 climbers who were trimming branches high up in the trees while I fed debris into the wood chipper below. It was a routine day until a Dodge truck pulled up. It wasn't uncommon for people to stop and ask about our work or request a business card. I had a stack of Robbie's cards in my pocket just for such encounters. As I extended a card to one of the men, the other blindsided me with a punch to the side of my head. I hit the ground, stunned, and before I could react, both men began kicking me mercilessly. The attack was sudden and gave me no time to defend myself. Instinct took over, and I curled into a ball, trying to shield my head and body from the blows. The assault ended as quickly as it had begun. Josh climbed down from the tree in a hurry, running over to help me sit up. Struggling to focus through the blinding pain, I squinted and caught a glimpse of Jimmy on his phone as the Dodge roared off into the distance. My chest burned with every shallow breath, each inhale sending a searing pain through my right side. It hit me with a wave of clarity. I'd suffered my first broken rib. Nearby, sprawled on the ground, was one of the men who had assaulted me. His face was a gruesome mess, blood pooling around him. Jimmy and Josh, witnessing the chaos, sprang into action. Thinking fast, Josh lowered his chainsaw, safely powered off, using a rope, then swung it toward the two men still kicking me. The blunt force of the chainsaw smashed into the larger man's head, tearing part of his ear clean off. The second attacker bolted without hesitation. Though the chainsaw wasn't running, its impact left a jagged wound on the big man's skull. Moments later, as he began to stir, Jimmy delivered a decisive kick to his groin, leaving him groaning. Most of the blows, however, had landed on me. I remained motionless, my body racked with pain, until paramedics arrived. I flat out refused to share the ambulance with the man who'd attacked me, so the police hauled him off in a patrol car. At the hospital, I discovered Robbie had already arrived. The big guy's injuries were severe, a deep slash across his skull and a mangled ear that somehow hadn't detached entirely. My own pain felt less significant in comparison, but the doctor and Robbie were adamant that I stay the night for observation. Meanwhile, the police caught the other man in the Dodge before he'd managed to drive 10 kilometers. Exhausted after the day's events, I settled in with a bland hospital dinner, hoping for some uninterrupted rest. That hope was short-lived. At 1 a.m., my phone buzzed, cutting through the quiet. Who would call at this hour, and why me? "Terry here," the voice on the line said. "We've got a situation, and I need your help." Groggy, I responded. "I'm not exactly in great shape to help anyone right now. What's going on?" "It's Mom. She's been arrested. I need you to bail her out." "Arrested? For what?" "She crashed her car, DUI. It's bad." "Is she hurt?" "Not badly, but the car's totaled. She smashed into 6 parked cars and a fire hydrant." "Was she alone?" "Yeah, that's all I know. The police won't release her without bail, so I called you." "Terry, I can't help. I'm stuck in Pottsville Memorial Hospital. I got hurt at work and they're keeping me overnight. I can barely move." "What happened? Why are you in the hospital?" "Broke a couple of ribs. I'm bandaged up like a mummy and can't even drive. I'll recover in a few days, but I'm no use tonight." "Should I call Aunt Sarah? She might be able to help." "Good idea. She's probably the best bet. Meanwhile, see what more you can find out about what happened. Let me know." "All right. I'll call tomorrow with an update." The next afternoon, Robbie drove me home and stocked my kitchen with frozen meals. I'd asked for beer, but he only brought Coke. I could manage bathroom trips and basic meals, but otherwise I was stuck on the couch, resigned to an Adam Sandler movie marathon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Terry called again. "Noreen was out drinking with people from your old job," she said. That surprised me. I hadn't realized she had any friends there, apart from Dirk. Apparently the group had been having a good time until the police arrived and arrested Dirk. Noreen, already upset, spiraled into heavier drinking. The situation was unraveling into chaos, and all I could do was listen from my spot on the couch, powerless to intervene. Before the bar shut down, she adamantly refused to call a cab or let anyone offer her a ride home. Terry never managed to uncover the details surrounding Dirk's arrest, or the reason for Noreen's dramatic response to it. We continued chatting for a while longer. Terry seemed relieved that I was back and capable of handling things on my own again. They mentioned wanting to come visit, but were stuck without transportation. Sarah had been the one to post bail for my wife, yet Noreen hadn't returned to the house. Terry handed me Sarah's number, urging me to get in touch. I didn't hesitate and dialed immediately. "Sarah, it's John. What's going on?" I asked as soon as she picked up. "John, your wife is a mess and it's entirely your fault," she shot back. "Wait a second. How is this on me?" I replied. "Because you abandoned her," Sarah snapped. "Abandoned her? Are you kidding me? You know me better than that. Why would I just walk out on my job and my family?" I asked incredulously. "She claims you got fired and took it out on her," Sarah said sharply. "And did she mention why I got fired?" I pressed. "She said you assaulted some guy at work because he danced with her at a party," Sarah answered. "It wasn't just dancing," I said bitterly. "She didn't tell you, did she? She slept with him. At the party, Sarah. And then she gave him her underwear as some kind of trophy." There was silence on the other end of the line. "No," Sarah said finally, her voice quieter. "She didn't mention any of that." "I didn't hit him because of a dance," I continued. "I hit him because he humiliated me, bragging about their little fling to everyone at the office." Sarah didn't say anything for a while. When she finally spoke, her tone was hesitant. "Did she tell you why Dirk got arrested last night?" "No, but from what you're saying it sounds like she wants me to take the blame," I replied. Before Sarah could respond, a knock at the door interrupted me. "I have to go," I told her quickly. "I'll call you tomorrow." When I opened the door, my brother-in-law Toby stood there, his usual sour expression in place. Still, family is family. "Hey, Toby," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in. Want a beer?" "Yeah, I could go for one," he said with a nod. I grabbed a Foster's from behind the stack of sodas Robbie had left in the fridge. My stomach churned uneasily, thanks to the pain meds I'd taken earlier, but I handed Toby the beer and sat down. "We've got a lead on who sent those guys after you," Toby began. "Turns out the guys he hired were quick to spill. It's Dirk Franklin, isn't it?" "That's the one," I confirmed. "You know him?" "I know of him," Toby replied. "He was tangled up with Noreen," I explained. "I warned him to stay away, but he didn't take me seriously." "Well, we don't have to worry about him anymore," Toby said with a grin. "He confessed to everything, saves everyone the trouble of a trial. Sentencing's this Friday. He's probably looking at 2 or 3 years tops." "Glad to hear it," I said, nodding in satisfaction. Toby chuckled, shaking his head. "You're enjoying this, aren't you, John?" "Let's just say it feels good to see some justice being served," I replied with a smirk. "You're not roping me into whatever you're planning, are you?" Toby asked warily. "Come on, Toby. Don't act like you're not already involved," I teased. Toby groaned, standing up. "If you want to pay him a visit, he's in city jail until sentencing. I'll stop by tomorrow morning if you want a ride." Before he left, I asked, "How's Sally doing? You treating my sister right?" "Honestly, I think she's the one looking after me," he admitted with a sheepish grin. The next morning, my trip to the police station wasn't as daunting as I'd expected, except for the challenge of climbing in and out of my truck. That, it turned out, was the real battle. I couldn't decide which was worse, being wrapped so tightly I could barely move or feeling like I'd lost every shred of flexibility. As I entered the room, Dirk's grin spread wide, practically cutting across his face. "Feeling a bit stiff there, Mr. Esterly? Did you trip over a twig on your way in?" His smirk grew as I grimaced, fighting to sit upright. "Welcome to Schuylkill County, Dirk. My turf. I'm sure you'll have a blast," I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not likely, John," Dirk retorted, his tone casual but sharp. "I'm out of here by Friday, but tell me, was it all worth it?" I scowled, unsure of what he was getting at. "What are you talking about?" He gestured at my bandaged body with mock sympathy. "This, all of this. Losing your job, your wife, everything. Was it worth it?" The question hit me like a slap, even though I didn't fully understand it. "I never did anything to you that you didn't bring on yourself," I shot back. "You should have let it go," Dirk said, his voice full of condescension. "I was better than you back then, and guess what? I still am. Even your wife thought so. She's yours now, though. Lucky you." "Oh, I'm enjoying her already," he added with a sneer. "Actually, I've enjoyed her several times since you left. Once, in fact, in your bed while the kids were at school. She was furious when she got served those divorce papers, you know. The smugness in his expression ignited a burning anger inside me. If the judge handed him a state prison sentence, revenge would be harder to achieve, but the craving for it was starting to consume me. The DA's office was on the third floor of the courthouse, a place stuck in time with no elevator to speak of. It was far from accessible, a glaring oversight that no one seemed to care about. As I climbed the creaky stairs, I heard someone call my name. John Esterly? I turned to see Elizabeth Vargas. In high school, she'd been the shining star, valedictorian, a Penn State scholar, and eventually a law school graduate. Her picture-perfect life included marrying the soccer captain, the only one from our year to attend the Air Force Academy. But fate dealt her a cruel hand. Captain Philip Vargas died in a car crash after a decade of marriage. We exchanged small talk for a few minutes, reminiscing about the past, though I felt like a mere bystander in the dazzling story of her life. She was polished and successful. I was barely a blip. Desperate to escape the conversation, I said, "It's nice seeing you again, Elizabeth. I'd heard you were working here, so I thought I'd stop by and say hello." I made a move to leave, but she stopped me cold. "Sit down, John. Enough with the pleasantries. You're here about Dirk Franklin, aren't you?" I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, but now I'm wondering if this was a mistake." "John, I'm leading the case. I know everything about it," she said with authority. "It's open and shut. He's going to prison. What do you want to discuss?" I squirmed in my seat. I just wanted to make sure he gets what's coming to him. Elizabeth leaned back, her sharp smile cutting through my defenses. "Interesting. Usually these kinds of vendettas come from big, tough guys. But here you are, John." Her words stung, leaving me feeling exposed and out of place. Rubbing my hands together, I avoided her gaze, trying to find the right words. She wasn't going to let me off easy. "I lost everything because of Dirk," I said at last. "My job, my wife, my kids. It's all gone. I just want to make sure his sentence isn't some kind of vacation." She nodded thoughtfully. "So would you rather he stay in county jail or head to state prison?" "Do I even get a say in that?" I asked bitterly. "Well," she said, her tone even, "I can keep him in county for up to 2 years. Anything longer and he'll have to go to state." I sat there, letting her words sink in. My hatred for Dirk burned hotter than ever, but I needed to make sure he paid the price. She caught sight of my smile, and it clearly piqued her curiosity. 2 years here, I mused, would likely be more than enough. Gathering my resolve, I stood up once again. This time she didn't try to intervene, but as I turned to leave, her voice stopped me. "John, how about joining me for lunch at Scripsy's around noon?" I gave her a slight nod, my smile faint but genuine. She mirrored it with one of her own, and for the first time, I found myself looking forward to something as simple as lunch. After leaving the courthouse, I wandered into a few shops. I decided to buy a crisp new shirt and pants, breaking away from the monotonous workwear I always brought along. On a whim, I also picked up a case of beer. Between choosing pills or beer, I figured beer was the lesser evil. I wasn't sure if the lunch invitation was strictly professional or hinted at something more personal. It turned out to be the latter. Elizabeth had returned to town after her husband Philip passed away. Although she had some government assistance, it barely covered the essentials, so she was looking for work. She also had a 16-year-old son named Philip Jr., though she affectionately called him Second. After his birth, they decided against traditional names like Junior and settled on that quirky nickname. Elizabeth wasn't someone who shared her story easily unless she felt at ease, so I let her speak without pressing. At the same time, I kept my own problems under wraps. I didn't want to come across as weak or pitiable. At that point, my confidence was hanging by a thread, and I couldn't afford another blow. Before we parted ways, Elizabeth tried to comfort me about the impending sentencing. Her words helped for a moment, but the hope they sparked quickly dissolved when I got home. There on the porch sat my 3 kids, surrounded by suitcases and travel bags. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice sharp with confusion. No one responded immediately. Finally, I asked again, "How did you even find me?" Brian was the first to answer. "Uncle Robbie gave us your address." I scanned the area. "Where's your ride? I don't see a car." Aunt Sarah dropped us off, he explained. She couldn't stay. As I stepped closer, Brian stood and added, "Can you grab the case of beer from the car? It was too heavy for me." Terry reached out to steady me as I climbed the steps. I didn't need the help, but I let her, knowing how things might appear. Meanwhile, Brian lugged the beer into the kitchen, and Sal handed out bowls of ice cream to everyone. I had no idea how long they'd been waiting before I arrived. "Why would Aunt Sarah think this was the best idea?" I asked. Brian kept talking, offering vague answers that didn't really explain anything. I sipped a warm soda, wishing for the cold beer that sat just out of reach. "What circumstances?" I pressed again. Brian hesitated, glancing at his siblings. Finally, Terry broke the silence. "Sal came home early a couple of days ago and found Mom with some guy in your bedroom." My mind reeled. Unbelievable. Just perfect. Did she know who he was? Sal sat nearby, but I didn't want to put her on the spot. Instead, Terry continued. "No, she didn't recognize him, but she said he was someone you work with." I turned to my youngest daughter. "Sal, honey, what happened?" Sal shrugged. "I watched for a minute or two. I've seen people make love online, but seeing my mom with some random guy was gross, so I left and went back to school." "Did your mother realize you saw her?" I asked carefully. "I don't think so," Sal replied. "Her eyes were closed most of the time." Anger surged through me. I grabbed an empty soda can and flung it across the room. It bounced harmlessly off a wall, the action more cathartic than destructive. "Have you all eaten yet?" I asked, trying to shift gears. They shook their heads. "Terry, can you order a couple of pizzas?" I asked, trying to focus on something manageable. While the kids unpacked, I stepped into another room and called my lawyer. My voice was firm as I instructed him to amend the divorce papers. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. I was going to fight for full custody of my kids. It was a daring move, but I decided to go through with it. My first action afterward was to call Sarah. She had completely severed ties with her sister, refusing any form of contact or assistance. When the kids turned to her for help, she insisted they stay with me, even offering to drive them over herself. It was comforting, albeit fragile, to have her support. Sarah had already notified Noreen about the kids' whereabouts and the reasoning behind it. Dinner that evening was a simple, early pizza. Afterward, we exchanged small talk about various subjects before everyone gave me some much-needed space. Later that night, while rummaging through the fridge, I found an old, cold can of Foster's beer hidden in the back. It wasn't fresh, but it was better than nothing. I washed the beer down with a painkiller, hoping the combination would bring me some rest, and it did. By Friday, Dirk had been sentenced. He was given a year in county jail, though it was likely he'd serve only 6 months. Under normal circumstances, that might have seemed fair, but not for Dirk. 2 of his accomplices were handed 6-month sentences, reduced by time already served. The justice system never ceased to confuse me, though. Overall, I felt the outcome was acceptable. Saturday was a blur of activity, dominated by the task of settling the kids in. Despite bringing a mountain of belongings, each of them realized during unpacking that they'd forgotten something essential. A trip to Walmart became unavoidable and left my wallet significantly lighter. By the end of the day, life felt as normal as it could under the circumstances. Nobody seemed to miss Noreen. Once home, I noticed my painkiller supply running low, so I leaned on beer instead. Since I had no intention of driving or operating machinery, I considered it a harmless coping mechanism. The next morning, I overheard Toby chatting with the kids while I tried to shake off the haze. I swapped my usual painkiller for aspirin and pulled on my jeans. At some point, I knew I'd have to stop relying on either. When I walked into the kitchen, the kids greeted me with an exaggerated round of applause. My family wasn't exactly overflowing with sympathy. Their shared opinion was that I drank beer because I wanted to, not because I needed to, and they weren't entirely wrong. Terry handed me a steaming mug of coffee as I settled at the table. The kids, sensing Toby and I needed to talk, quietly excused themselves. "We've got a situation, John," Toby began just as I started to feel comfortable. I tried a sip of coffee, but it was scalding, so I set the mug down with a sigh. All right, Toby, what's going on? I asked. Saturday morning, the guards found Dirk Franklin in the prison laundry room. He'd been severely beaten, face smashed, ribs broken, and other injuries they hadn't fully assessed. This sort of thing isn't common. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't take long for him to get on someone's bad side, huh? It wasn't a stranger, Toby clarified, catching my faint smirk as I attempted another sip. The coffee was still hot, but now drinkable. Word got out that Dirk had thrown his cronies under the bus to lighten his sentence. Even though those guys got shorter penalties, they weren't thrilled about the betrayal. No concrete proof it was them, he added, and truthfully, there's little enthusiasm to dig deeper. I got up, refilled my cup, and gave Toby a wry smile. So what's the real issue here? He hesitated before answering. They transferred Dirk to a hospital in Allentown because of his injuries. He was under guard, but sometime last night he disappeared. Nobody knows how or when it happened. The smile vanished from my face. Disappeared? Are you saying he escaped? The staff didn't think he was capable of moving on his own, but it seems they underestimated him, Toby said. I didn't finish my coffee. Instead, I stood and poured it down the sink, staring out the kitchen window at the dreary view, a brick wall from the store next door. Toby remained silent while I processed this new chaos, feeling the weight of another storm brewing on the horizon. I felt detached, indifferent to anything around me. It all seemed meaningless. I had never seen Dirk as a direct threat, but the knowledge that he roamed free gnawed at me. His liberty felt like a splinter in my thoughts. The silence between us stretched until my brother-in-law stood up and broke it. John, I'll keep you informed. If anything new comes up, I'll let you know, he said, before heading out the back door. I stayed in place, staring at the brick wall as it clicked shut behind him. Dad, how about I make you some scrambled eggs? Terry offered, breaking the tension. That sounds great, I said, pushing myself up, but I'll grab a shower first. Later that afternoon, I decided to call Sarah. She hadn't heard from Noreen either and had no idea where she might be. I couldn't tell if that was a comfort or a concern. Meanwhile, life began to fall into a rhythm. My injuries were healing faster than expected, and I secured a job at a small firm in Tamaqua. The short commute was a blessing. The kids settled quickly into their new lives, adapting better than I had hoped. We started spending more time with Elizabeth and her son, Brian. He and my kids bonded easily, and I occasionally noticed Terry glancing at him in a way that suggested a blossoming interest. Elizabeth and I mostly saw each other at family events or public gatherings at first, but before long, we found ourselves enjoying quiet dinners or a casual movie night together. At the same time, I maintained an unusual routine, sending a couple of packs of cigarettes every 2 weeks to the men who had once attacked me. Toby delivered them without fail, and although we never exchanged words, the gesture seemed understood. Toby even remarked that they seemed to grasp its purpose. Cigarettes were expensive, but if my plan kept them at bay, it was worth every penny. Sarah and I never heard from Noreen again. Had she gone back to Dirk, or had she vanished entirely? The uncertainty lingered, and it wasn't the only one. Not long after, 2 of the men involved in my assault were released from detention and disappeared without a trace. By the time I received the final notice of my divorce 3 months later, my life had undergone a full transformation. I was awarded custody of Brian and Sal, while Terry, now an adult, had started dental school in Reading. Elizabeth and I grew even closer, spending more time together as the months passed. Yet I couldn't fully enjoy the positive changes in my life. The thought of Dirk Franklin still lurking in the shadows was a constant weight. Did he still hold a grudge, or had he moved on? I couldn't be sure, and the uncertainty left me restless. Eventually, I accepted a position at a small auto insurance company in Pottsville. 6 months later, Elizabeth and I had a quiet wedding. Her only request was to keep her last name, Vargas. I understood her reasons and didn't question them. Around the same time, Elizabeth found out that Noreen was working and living at a Salvation Army facility in downtown Philadelphia. Although she never came back into our lives, she started sending birthday cards to the kids. In time, I began receiving cards too. They came sporadically, on Flag Day, Veterans Day, Arbor Day. Each bore the same simple message. Thinking of you, DF. I showed them to Elizabeth, but neither of us could figure out how to respond. The postmarks varied, coming from different cities along the East Coast. At first I threw the cards away, brushing them off as harmless. But as they arrived more frequently, unease crept in. Dirk Franklin was like a ghost I couldn't exorcise. Elizabeth tried to help me stay calm, her steady presence an anchor in the storm of my thoughts, but I felt powerless. 2 weeks before Christmas, a new card arrived. This one felt different, its tone sharper, more threatening. I have a special gift for you. See you soon. DF. While Dirk had never harmed the children, I couldn't be certain his intentions hadn't changed. Fear for Elizabeth and the kids consumed me, leaving me sleepless and on edge. Despite being physically gone, Dirk still managed to haunt me. All I could do was remain alert, bracing for what seemed inevitable. Then, 2 days before Christmas, everything came to an abrupt and unexpected end. The final card arrived, a simple holiday greeting. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Baltimore Sun. The article read, "The body of a man, identified as Dirk Franklin, was discovered today in a burned-out vehicle near a brickyard in Glengarry. Due to the condition of the body, the cause of death remains undetermined." The card was unsigned, with only a brief note written beneath the clipping. "Thanks for the cigarettes." This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. James's attention was drawn to a small blister pack resting on the bathroom counter, its silvery foil catching the light. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The unfamiliar packaging piqued his curiosity. It was out of place among their usual household items. With a furrowed brow, he set it back down and began rifling through the nearby cabinet and Rebecca's makeup drawer, searching for answers. Tucked away behind a clutter of old perfume bottles, he unearthed something that sent a jolt through him, a small cardboard box. His pulse quickened as he read the label, "Birth control pills." James froze, the realization crashing over him. After their son Sam was born, James had undergone a vasectomy, rendering contraceptives unnecessary, or so he'd thought. His gaze shifted toward the hallway. The faint sound of laughter drifted in from the living room where Emily, 6, and Sam, 4, were playing. A knot of unease tightened in his chest. He couldn't let them sense anything was wrong, but his mind churned with questions. There seemed to be only one reason for Rebecca to have birth control pills, and it didn't involve him. He carefully returned the box to its hiding spot, closed the drawer, and stepped back, his thoughts racing. Confronting Rebecca now felt premature. He needed to gather more information. If she was hiding something, he had to approach this delicately. With a mix of resolve and apprehension, James left the bathroom, the unsettling discovery clinging to him like a shadow. At 37, James prided himself on his sharp instincts, qualities that had propelled his success as a marketing specialist. His job often took him on the road, filled with client meetings, long flights, and nights spent working in sterile hotel rooms. But the company's recent shift to hybrid workdays had granted him more time at home with Rebecca and their kids. He'd cherished the newfound closeness, until this morning's revelation threatened to unravel it all. By the time James fully processed what he'd found, Rebecca had already left for work, leaving him to handle the kids' morning routine alone. Emily and Sam chattered happily in the back seat as he drove them to school and daycare, blissfully unaware of his inner turmoil. An idea began to take root in James's mind. If he wanted answers, he needed concrete evidence. A DNA test to confirm if Emily and Sam were truly his started to seem like the only way to get clarity. The more he dwelled on it, the more determined he became. Alongside the DNA test, another idea emerged, discreetly installing surveillance cameras around the house. It was a drastic step, but James felt it was necessary. He needed to know what happened when he wasn't home. How did Rebecca spend her time during his late-night work calls or client meetings? After dropping off the kids, James refined his plan. He would gather DNA samples from Emily and Sam, perhaps strands of hair from their brushes or saliva from their toothbrushes, and send them to a reputable lab under a fake name. As for the cameras, he would place them in key areas where Rebecca was likely to spend time, making sure they blended seamlessly into the surroundings. A chance to act came quickly. When Rebecca mentioned plans for a night out with friends, James saw an opening. That evening, while she was away, he carefully installed 3 small cameras, one in the living room, another in the kitchen, and a third in their bedroom. Each one was hidden with meticulous precision, giving him a measure of control over an otherwise chaotic situation. To maintain the illusion of normalcy, James mentioned over dinner that he'd be busy with a new project at work. "Looks like I'll be staying late at the office for the next week," he said, feigning frustration. Rebecca responded casually. "That's fine," she said with a shrug. "Work's slow for me right now, so I can handle things with the kids." She smiled at him, warm, reassuring, and unremarkable. James forced a smile in return, masking the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Over the following week, James executed his plan. Each morning, he left for the office, pausing in his car to prepare himself for whatever the cameras might reveal. He piled on extra work to validate his long hours, often staying until the building was nearly deserted. Then, at night, he would review the footage, his laptop glowing faintly in the darkness. The waiting gnawed at him, a mixture of dread and determination propelling him forward. James knew that what he uncovered could upend his entire world, but he was ready. Whatever the truth turned out to be, he was resolved to face it head on. At first, life seemed to follow its usual pattern, predictable and comforting in its familiarity. Rebecca had taken some time off work to be with the kids and handle various household chores. James watched her as she prepared meals, drove the children to school, and folded laundry. These were everyday actions, reassuring in their ordinariness. But as Thursday approached, a strange undercurrent began to disrupt this routine. While reviewing security footage that evening, James caught sight of Rebecca sitting in the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, her tone urgent, as though she didn't want to be overheard. Despite the poor audio quality, James strained to catch her words. Disjointed phrases surfaced, and then a name. Robert Collins, her boss. The familiarity in her tone set off alarm bells. It was far from professional. Most of the conversation was garbled, but certain phrases managed to break through the static. "Meeting, don't worry, we'll figure it out." James's jaw tightened as he watched her recline on the couch, laughing softly and absently twisting a strand of hair between her fingers. By the time he closed the laptop that night, an inescapable unease had taken hold. The woman he thought he knew so well now seemed like a stranger, her actions carving away at the trust he had always taken for granted. Then Friday came, bringing with it a discovery that shattered his tenuous sense of calm. The day's footage began innocuously. Rebecca was in the kitchen, packing lunches and helping the kids get ready for school. Little Sam, with his oversized backpack nearly swallowing him whole, giggled as Rebecca crouched down to fix it. Turning up the volume, James caught her voice, bright and cheerful, yet holding a statement that stopped him cold. "After school today, we're going to visit Robert for a few hours." James froze. Why would Rebecca take their children to see her boss? His confusion spiraled into dread as she added, "This is our little secret, okay? Daddy can't know about this trip. If he does, the evil fairy will come and take him away forever, and he'll be so sad." The children exchanged solemn looks, their young faces marked by an unnatural seriousness. "We won't tell, Mommy," Sam whispered, his voice filled with earnestness. Emily nodded in agreement, clapping her small hands as if they had just been entrusted with an important mission. James's heart twisted painfully. Their innocence was being used to conceal something dark, something he wasn't ready to confront. His mind raced, his thoughts crashing into each other as he replayed the scene. Rebecca wasn't just hiding something, she was involving their children in the deception. Anger surged through him, hot and uncontrollable. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to hurl the laptop across the room. Instead, he clenched the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white as he fought to keep his composure. Losing control wouldn't help him get to the truth. With the laptop shut, a heavy weight settled over him. The DNA test results he'd ordered would soon arrive, offering the answers he dreaded. Until then, he could do nothing but wait, his frustrations simmering beneath the surface. Questions swirled relentlessly in his mind, each one sharper than the last. The Rebecca he thought he knew was slipping away, and with her, the life they had built together. That evening, James came home later than usual. The children were already tucked into bed, and Rebecca lay sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up as he walked in, her face lighting up with a tired but warm smile. "Tough day?" she asked casually. "Yeah, pretty long," he replied, forcing a smile as he leaned down to kiss her cheek. The gesture felt hollow, an act he had to perform. Suppressing the urge to pull away, he engaged in light conversation, asking about her day while masking the storm brewing inside him. Rebecca seemed oblivious, laughing at his jokes and brushing his arm playfully, her affection a cruel contrast to the doubts gnawing at him. When the house finally fell silent and everyone else was asleep, James lay awake in the darkness. His thoughts refused to quiet, circling endlessly. Rebecca's secrecy, the trip to see Robert, her cryptic conversations. Each memory tightened the noose around his mind, leaving him gasping for clarity. By the early hours of the morning, he could no longer bear the suffocating weight of his suspicions. Slipping quietly out of bed, he moved toward Rebecca's nightstand, where her phone rested. His hands trembled as he picked it up, his breathing shallow and quick. Closing the bedroom door softly behind him, he locked himself in the bathroom. For a moment, he simply stared at the device, the dark screen reflecting his anguished face. The sound of his heartbeat roared in his ears as he steeled himself, knowing he was crossing a line he could never uncross. He had never crossed her boundaries like this before. Their unspoken agreement to honor each other's privacy had been inviolable until now. But that trust had evaporated, dissolved by a growing sense of doubt. Steeling himself, he began tapping the screen, inputting passwords, each failed attempt making the knot in his stomach tighten. After a series of futile guesses, he entered Emily's birth date. The screen unlocked. The light from the phone pierced the shadowy bathroom, highlighting the tremor in his hands as he opened her messages. At first, the conversations seemed harmless, ordinary exchanges with her mother, casual banter with colleagues. Then he saw Robert's name. His chest tightened as he opened the thread, apprehension building with every word. Most messages seemed innocent enough, discussions about work, scheduling, lighthearted jokes, but sprinkled among them, like drops of venom, were phrases that made his blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you. Tomorrow? Same spot? Miss you." James felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. The walls seemed to press closer with each passing second as he scrolled further, his hands shaking. Then he saw it, the message that tore his world apart. "I can't leave my husband yet. This has to be done carefully." The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was deliberate, premeditated. She wasn't merely unfaithful. She was planning to abandon him completely. And worse, the fragmented nature of the thread suggested messages had been deleted. But the damning ones were still there, leaving no doubt. James steadied his quaking hands and pulled out his own phone. Methodically, he took photos of the screen, preserving every incriminating line. His mind was a whirlwind of devastation and fury. When he finished, he quietly placed her phone back on the nightstand, ensuring everything appeared untouched. Crawling back into bed, he lay frozen beside her, staring into the darkness as Rebecca slept peacefully, unaware of the storm raging inches away. The hours dragged on, his thoughts spiraling into despair. When dawn finally arrived, James barely recognized himself in the mirror. The face staring back was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his features etched with exhaustion. At breakfast, Rebecca noticed his transformation. "You don't look well," she remarked softly, her fingers brushing his arm with concern. "Are you okay?" He forced a faint smile, dismissing her worry with a hollow excuse. "Just been having trouble sleeping," he mumbled. Rebecca seemed unconvinced, but she let it go. Still, throughout the weekend, he felt her eyes lingering on him, sensing the unspoken tension. Every fleeting glance threatened to unravel him, but he maintained a facade of indifference, burying his turmoil under a brittle exterior. By Sunday night, he was counting the hours until work would provide a welcome escape. On Monday, just before lunch, his phone vibrated. His chest tightened as he opened the email. The DNA test results had arrived. He read the words over and over as if repetition could somehow alter their meaning. Probability of paternity, 0%. Time froze. Emily and Sam, his children, the ones he had loved and nurtured as his own, were not his. The revelation hit like a physical blow, scorching away the foundation of his life. He sat in stunned silence as a horrifying realization dawned. Rebecca's affair with Robert wasn't just a betrayal. Robert wasn't just her boss. He was almost certainly the father of the children James had devoted his life to raising. Anger surged, overpowering his despair. This wasn't a wound that could heal, nor a betrayal he could forgive. Rebecca's intricate web of deceit had finally unraveled, and James was done being ensnared. Resolute, he called his boss and cited a personal emergency, then left work immediately. His next call was to Angela Miller, an attorney whose marketing he had supported years ago. Now, he needed her legal expertise for something far more personal. When he arrived at Angela's sleek, modern office, the walls adorned with degrees and awards, she greeted him warmly, her sharp eyes scanning him with curiosity. "James," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "It's been a while. What brings you here?" The tension in James's voice was undeniable as he collapsed into the chair, every muscle in his body wound tight. At first he struggled to find the words, his emotions choking him, but soon the dam burst. He confessed it all, the pills he discovered, the hidden cameras he stumbled upon, the secretive meetings, and the devastating DNA test results that shattered his reality. Angela sat silently, her eyes unwavering and her hands clasped as she absorbed every shocking detail he shared. When James finally finished, Angela leaned back in her chair, releasing a deliberate, steadying breath. "James," she said gently, her voice tinged with compassion, "what you've been through is a profound betrayal. I'm so sorry, but you need to be careful. Don't let your emotions drive your next moves. This situation requires strategy." Though James nodded, his anger simmered just beneath the surface. "I can't keep living like this, Angela," he admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of his anguish. "She's been lying to me for years. I've been raising children that aren't even mine. And God knows how many times they've been sneaking off to Robert's house without me having a clue." His hands clenched into fists, his frustration boiling over. Angela leaned forward, her tone deliberate. "I get it, James. And I know you're desperate for resolution, but acting impulsively could make things worse. Divorce is messy, especially when infidelity and children are part of the equation." Her voice grew firmer as she continued, shifting to a pragmatic approach. "Here's where you need to start. Secure your assets. Collect every financial record you have, bank statements, pay stubs, receipts, anything that shows your earnings, savings, or investments. Organization will be your greatest strength." James's jaw tightened as he met her gaze. "She's not getting a penny more than what's fair," he declared with a steely edge to his voice. Angela nodded firmly. "We'll make sure of that. But remember, the court's primary concern will be the children, regardless of their biological connection to you. That's a reality you have to be prepared for. Depending on how this unfolds, we may even need to bring Robert into the legal process." "Good," James said bitterly, his voice dripping with resentment. "I want him involved. Both of them deserve to face the consequences." Angela's expression remained calm, her gaze steady. "And they will. But we need to approach this intelligently. Don't confront Rebecca yet. Let her think everything is normal. While she's in the dark, I'll begin filing the necessary paperwork, and we'll devise the best course of action to ensure you come out ahead." James took a deep breath, letting Angela's words sink in. For the first time amidst the chaos, he felt a flicker of clarity. "You're right," he said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Angela's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "You're not alone in this, James. We'll make sure justice is served." In the weeks that followed, the two worked tirelessly to construct an unassailable case. Angela guided James step by step, helping him secure his assets and lock down his finances. They meticulously documented Rebecca's actions, gathering every piece of evidence they could find. Angela also established a trust to protect James's property and savings from the divorce proceedings, ensuring his future was safeguarded. Her methodical approach left no detail overlooked, positioning James with every possible advantage. Each passing day strengthened James's resolve. The foundation had been laid, the strategy airtight. He felt ready to face the inevitable confrontation. One evening, as Rebecca lounged on the couch, scrolling casually through her phone, James stood in the doorway, the divorce papers clutched tightly in his hand. The sight of her so at ease made his chest constrict, but he steadied himself. Summoning every ounce of composure, he stepped into the room and met her gaze. "Rebecca," he said, his voice calm, though his pulse thundered in his ears. Extending the documents toward her, he added, "We need to talk." Rebecca's demeanor shifted dramatically the moment her eyes fell on the documents. What started as mild confusion quickly escalated into shock, followed by a slow-burning fury. In a swift motion, she grabbed the papers from James's hands, her face flushing as she scanned the text. "What is this supposed to be?" she demanded, her voice quivering with restrained anger. "Are you seriously doing this?" James remained unmoved, arms folded across his chest, his tone calm but firm. "It's exactly what it looks like, Rebecca. I've uncovered everything." Her eyes widened briefly, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face before hardening into a glare. "This is absurd, James," she retorted sharply. "You're making something out of nothing. This is pure paranoia." James shook his head with quiet determination. "No, Rebecca. This is the truth." Her fury boiled over, her voice lowering to a venomous whisper. "You've lost your grip on reality, James. Think about the kids. You're going to destroy their lives with this madness." But James held his ground. His voice stayed steady, unwavering. "No, Rebecca. You destroyed it all. You've been deceiving me for years, and now you're trying to use the kids against me? I won't let you manipulate me any longer." Rebecca's anger shifted to desperation. Her voice softened, almost pleading. "James, they're your children. You've been their father, their protector. How could you even think of abandoning them like this?" James looked at her with unflinching resolve. Without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving the house. As he drove off, his heart raced with the weight of betrayal pressing heavily on his chest. He found himself parked at a remote overlook, seeking refuge in the solitude. Sitting in his car, James opened his laptop and accessed the live feed from the cameras he had secretly installed weeks earlier. The screen came to life, showing Rebecca pacing anxiously in the kitchen. Her movements were frantic, her face pale with tension. She grabbed her phone and dialed, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Robert," she began, her tone a volatile mix of anger and panic. "He served me the divorce papers. He knows, Robert, he knows everything." James's pulse raced as he turned up the volume, straining to catch every word. "This is too soon," Rebecca hissed. "He wasn't supposed to find out yet. I should have filed first like we planned. If I had, I could have secured everything before he caught on. But your divorce took too long, because of your ex and her fertility mess." She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. "I told you this would happen if we waited." The truth hit James like a freight train. Her lies, her reassurances, her carefully orchestrated steps. It had all been part of a calculated plan. Rebecca's betrayal wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a deliberate scheme. A quiet, fervent "thank you" escaped James's lips as he realized just how close he had come to losing everything. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Now, he had a chance to reclaim his life. Determined, James committed himself to seeing this through. He wasn't alone in the fight. With Angela's guidance, he began preparing for the legal battle ahead. It would be more than just the end of his marriage. It would be the unveiling of Rebecca's duplicity. The first step was making the truth impossible to deny. Methodically, James compiled and distributed the damning evidence. Text messages between Rebecca and Robert, DNA results confirming the children weren't biologically his, and other incriminating details. He shared it with her closest confidants, friends, family, and acquaintances. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Shock and disgust rippled through her social circles, leaving Rebecca isolated and scrambling to defend herself against the avalanche of judgment. In court, James stood tall, Angela by his side. Armed with indisputable evidence, he presented his case with precision and clarity, dismantling Rebecca's defenses at every turn. Her attempts to justify her actions crumbled under the weight of the truth. Each revelation brought James closer to reclaiming his dignity and ensuring justice. What began as a devastating betrayal transformed into a story of resilience. Confronting the painful truth head-on, James refused to let Rebecca's manipulation dictate his future. In the end, he emerged stronger, with his integrity intact and a renewed sense of purpose. The evidence painted an undeniable picture. Messages, surveillance footage, and definitive DNA tests collectively exposed the harsh truth. Standing in court, James recounted the years he had devoted to a marriage that, unbeknownst to him, was riddled with deceit. He detailed the emotional scars left by the betrayal, wounds that ran deeper than he could have imagined. As James shared his story, the judge carefully examined the case files and ordered another round of DNA testing to confirm the paternity of Emily and Sam. As the proceedings unfolded, attention turned toward Robert Collins, a reluctant witness who had been compelled to take the stand. Robert entered the courtroom with visible tension, his unease apparent in every strained movement. It was revealed that he had endured a tumultuous marriage marked by his and his wife's inability to have children. Their struggle with infertility had driven a deep wedge between them, leading to a bitter divorce over the past year. Their separation, fraught with disputes over property and finances, had left Robert emotionally shattered and financially strapped. Despite these challenges, the court unearthed the truth about his secret affair with Rebecca, a relationship he had hidden while outwardly pretending to mend his marriage. Rebecca claimed ignorance regarding the true paternity of the children, asserting she could not have been certain that Robert was their biological father. She painted herself as an unwitting victim, accusing James of letting his anger distort his perspective. Yet the mountain of evidence told a different tale. The court reviewed a trove of messages, intimate communications, and finally, the conclusive DNA results that established Robert as the father of Emily and Sam. Rebecca's denials began to falter under the crushing weight of proof, and her pretense collapsed in the face of the judge's relentless scrutiny. At the conclusion of the trial, the judge delivered a decisive verdict in James's favor. His marriage to Rebecca was annulled, and he was freed from any future financial responsibilities toward her or her children. Additionally, his assets were protected, ensuring Rebecca could not claim the division of wealth she had once sought. Acknowledging the profound betrayal James had endured, the court awarded him substantial compensation for the years he had unknowingly provided for children who were not his. As the judge's gavel signaled the trial's end, James felt a profound sense of release. The trial's conclusion brought closure to a harrowing chapter in James's life. The pain and betrayal that had defined his recent years were now behind him. As he left the courthouse with his head held high, James felt a renewed sense of dignity and purpose. Angela, his steadfast ally throughout the ordeal, walked beside him, ready to help him face the next phase of his life. The weeks that followed were marked by quiet victories. James settled into a new home, approached his work with fresh determination, and began rediscovering the inner peace that had long eluded him. Bit by bit, he pieced his life back together. For the first time in years, James felt whole. The shadow of lies had lifted, leaving him stronger and clearer than ever. With the worst behind him, he looked toward the future with optimism, ready to embrace the brighter days that lay ahead. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.